This is a cost of service study for water rates for the next 3 years.
All right. Hello. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I always forget to introduce myself. So my name is Jill. I'm with Utility Financial Solutions. I work with Mark. And I feel like you know our firm. We've worked with you guys for quite some time. So I've been with UFS since 2014, and I've been working with Groton since 2016. And we do studies for electric, water, wastewater, telecommunications, gas, solid waste. And as you know, we're kind of on a rotation with you guys at Groton. We look at the studies, one study for each utility each year. So we just recently completed the wastewater. And if you're looking at the timing, you'll notice we're actually a little bit early to start looking at water. But we wanted to come to you with the water study because of some changes that we are starting to see in the water industry. And this is not specific to Groton, but it has impacted many water utilities across the country. So we can go to the next slide. And what we're seeing are financial changes. So increases in labor that we did not anticipate, increases in inflation that have kind of pulled into the water industry and lagged behind general inflation, like inflation for chemicals and other utilities like power. And also increases in capital cost. So a study just came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics about the increases in capital costs and specifically the water industry. And those have kind of all compounded to affect the financial position of the water utility here at Groton. So I'm going to go over some of the more specific changes on the next slide. But as part of the work that we do for you, we actually do 3 separate studies. The first one is the financial projection, where we are looking at those financial changes. And what we do is I get to work really close with E. We take all of your historical financial data. I looked back to 2018, line by line in your trial balance. We look at your budget, and we use macroeconomic indicators like inflation, like your capital plans, to look out over a period of 5 years to see how our costs are changing and how we need to change our revenue in order to keep up with those changing costs. And I don't want to bury the lead here. So I think you got the presentation ahead of time. So if you've looked through it, you'll see that we are proposing a series of around 10% adjustments each year. But the way that we've considered those adjustments and the cost of service study supports this is designing the rates in a way that limits the impact to the residential class. So for your retail residential ratepayers, they're going to see on average a $2 to $3 monthly impact with the rate plan that we've put together. But I want you to really understand the work that we've done with these studies, how they're interrelated, and I want you to be comfortable with what you see. I want you to understand it so that you can decide at the end if you agree with the plan that we've put together. So the financial projection is that looking out at the overall system need. The cost of service study is a little bit different. So the cost of service study looks at 1 year and one moment in time. And the year that we're looking at for the cost of service study is fiscal year 2026. And we look at your total revenue requirement for the system in that year. And we assign cost allocations to help us determine who is causing what costs to occur on your system. And then the cost of service study gives us direction that we'll use in the design of the rates. So with the rate design, we actually have quite a change in how we're looking at the rates, and that's supported by the cost of service study. But in turn, that has allowed us to limit the impact to the residential class of these 10% rate adjustments. So if we want to go to the next slide, this is the overview of the financial changes that I mentioned. So since the last study, the last study was done in 2022. For this study, we're looking at the period from 2026 to 2029. And over the study period that we looked at previously, we were anticipating, sorry, I can't see very well, about a 13% increase. Maybe I'll just take this out. About a 13% increase in operating expenses. So that's looking at inflation. In reality, what we realized with expenses over that same period was a 22.5% increase in expenses. That's largely driven by your increase in chemicals costs and your increase in labor costs. And that labor increase, that's negotiated, and that is really typical across the nation, that these labor increases have kind of lagged that inflation that we saw coming out of the pandemic. So labor is about 8% each year for the next 3 years. Now, compounded on top of that is a decline in sales. We did not anticipate a decline in sales. We looked at holding sales constant. So we did not forecast any growth in the previous study, which is typically a pretty conservative approach. We look back 5 years at your usage and how your usage has been trending. We saw no indication that we would anticipate a decline in sales. So with a 4% adjustment, which is what we have done over the past 3 years, we were anticipating an increase in revenue compounded at 17.2%, but in reality, we only realized an 11% increase in revenue, which does not support that increase in our operating expenses. And then the last piece are our capital costs. So the previous study had our capital costs at about $7.6 million, and capital costs have increased 18% over that period. So the same work costs more, and the actual cost for that work was around $9 million. And this is, again, consistent with what we've seen across the country, and the Handy Whitman Index for construction capital cost supports this as well. So going to the next slide, these assumptions are what we've built in for the study this next time around. So we're looking at a 4% inflationary factor over the next 5 years. We are still projecting no change in growth. So we've normalized the usage for seasonality, and then we're holding the usage constant. Our capital improvement program, that first year in 2026, we're anticipating spending on the tank, Brandegee Avenue tank. So that's that $4.4 million. And then over the next 3 years, $1.75 million. And then out in 2030, we're hoping to spend something a little closer to your depreciation expense. So typically we propose for utilities to spend at least as much as depreciation in order to keep up with an aging system. And so historically, we haven't been able to do that because we've been in a cash flow bind. So we're hoping by out in 2030, we'll be able to spend in capital what we're depreciating each year. But in order to support these capital needs, we do need to issue some additional bonding. So we're already approved to draw down on some debt. So we'll be doing that as part of the plan in 2026, but we will need to look at issuing additional funding for projects moving forward. And then we'll want to cash flow the net of those two. So about $250,000 each year. Okay, so putting the assumptions into the plan, if we go to the next slide, if we did no additional rate adjustments, this slide is showing the impact to the financial health of the utility. So let me just explain the timing column, because this is going to come up a couple times. So we have a approved 4% adjustment that's going to take place in October. This is carryover from the prior study, and that will happen October 1st. Now, looking at additional rate adjustments, the next rate adjustment would take place January 1st of 2026. This is a little bit different than what we've previously done, but because of the current financial projection, we wanted to build in a mid-year rate adjustment to help turn some of this around a little bit quicker. And then the following years are all set for October, just like we've done previously. So that's the timing of the adjustment. So just keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. So if we made no additional revenue adjustments, our first column here is showing our adjusted operating income. In 2026, we're about neutral. But it shows that we should be bringing in an operating income of around $3 million. And it sounds kind of strange because we are a non-for-profit utility. So why would we need to bring in a profit? But we do need to make money in order to break even. And there's two reasons for that. So the first is interest expense on debt is not included in our operating income. It's what we call below the line. So your operating income is your operating revenues less your operating expenses. And interest expense is considered a non-operating expense. So we still need to fund that through our rates. So we need to incorporate that into our operating income. And the second is the inflationary increase in the replacement cost, of our assets. So say that I have an asset today and I put it into service and it costs $1 million. Okay, what's going to happen financially is that each year we're going to recognize the financial wearing down of that asset. So we're going to book $100,000 to depreciation expense each year over its 10-year useful life. So that at the end of the 10 years, theoretically, I will have recovered $1 million through rates to go out and pay for the replacement of the asset. But the problem with that is 10 years from today, that asset's going to cost something more than $1 million. It's going to cost $1.3 million. So we need to recover that $300,000 or inflationary increase in the replacement cost of the asset so that when I go to replace the asset, I have the money in order to do so. And we've recovered it fairly through those who are consuming the asset over its useful life. So our operating income over the period has dropped to negative losses. Now, the second target that we look at are your cash balances. And in the beginning of 2026, we're anticipating cash to be around $1 million. And in our look at your financials, $1 million is too low. We need to maintain a minimum amount of cash, and there's justified reason for that. So in our minimum, we're proposing about $7.5 million that we need to hold at a minimum. And that is to fund our debt payments. We need cash to fund the operating lag between when you pay your bills and when you receive your cash from customers. So we incorporated a 45-day working capital lag. We need the money to fund the cash flowed piece of the capital, that $250,000 each year. And then we also need money because we need to recognize that bad and unexpected things can happen. And we need to have cash in the bank in order to deal with a problem if one should arise. And so all of that together, looking at all of those four factors, comes out to about $7.5 to $8 million. And you can see because of the operating losses, our cash is projected to drop to pretty heavy negatives throughout the projection. Now, the last thing we look at, it's not quite as important for you because your debt is backed by the city, but we do look at your debt coverage ratio. And even though your debt is backed by the city, we want you to be cash flowing enough from operations to pay your debt payment at least once. And we can see here that the ratio is below 1. So that means that we're not cash flowing enough from operations to meet our debt payment each year. And that is too low. Okay. Any questions on this slide? And feel free to, I didn't say this at the beginning, but if you have questions along the way, just stop me. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is the plan that we've put together to try and turn this around. Now, the first line, that grayed out line, is the projected adjustment that we have planned for October. And then in January, we're looking at following that up with a 6% adjustment. So in total for fiscal year 2026, that equates to a 10% rate adjustment, followed by 3 more October rate adjustments at 10%. Now, I know that 10% sounds big and it sounds scary, and I have a lot of respect for that. In the way that we've designed the rates, we've tried to limit the impact to the residential class, and the cost of service study supports this. So for a residential ratepayer, so a 5/8 inch or a 1-inch meter, the average impact is about 5.5%, and that translates to around $3 monthly bill impact. Okay. What this rate plan does is it turns around our adjusted operating income. So you can see we get that up to appropriate levels out in 2028. Our cash balances, we're not quite making it up to the minimum with this rate plan. However, we are turning them around and we're working toward it. And then our debt coverage ratio gets above that 1. In 2026, we target for financial planning a 1.4. So that's why it's not turning green until 2028. Now, with limiting the residential impact, there will be higher impacts on non-residential accounts. And you'll see this in a later slide. But the impacts for non-residential accounts vary between 8% and 12% per year. And now we've looked at every single one of your customers' billing data individually for 2024. So these impacts are from that data. It's not generalized. Okay, any questions on the financial projection? Okay, you can move to the next slide. So the next study is the cost of service study. And this is just looking at fiscal year 2026 and taking a deep dive into your revenue requirements. So what classes or what components of the rate are causing what costs to occur on the system? And so when we're looking at the first 2 lines of this table, water sales and customer service charges, that is for your retail ratepayers. So residential customers that you serve, businesses that you serve directly. And then we've separated out our larger customers. So a couple industry and sales for resale, those types of customers. And looking at the overall cost of service, if we were going to fully fund our revenue requirement in 2026, we would need to be bringing in $17.2 million. But at our projected rates, so at the rates that will go into effect in October, we are going to bring in $13.2 million. So the difference there is about 30% between what our rates are bringing in and what it costs to fully fund the system in 2026. Now, the way we like to read this table is the water sales, that's referring to the commodity or what you charge for the usage, the variable piece. And when we look at the increase in comparison to the cost of service, it's 16.3%. So that's below the average of about 30%. So the commodity rate does need to go up, but in comparison to cost to serve, It does not need to go up as much as the customer charges or the fixed monthly, you call it a facilities charge. Those need to go up more because they're above that 30%. So customer charges show 37.3%. And then our large customers are also showing above cost of service. So relative to cost of serve, they need to go up more. We are under recovering from our larger customers. And we're under recovering from the customer service charges. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We have some breakdowns of the rate components. So the monthly facilities charge, the monthly customer charge, all of that terminology means the same thing. It's the monthly component on the bill. And it's there to represent the fixed costs that do not vary with usage. And this charge is very important for revenue stability. And it's justified because we need our fixed cost recovery to pay for things like reading the meter, repairing and replacing the meter, the cost to bill, the cost for customer service, the cost of the service line that goes from the street to the customer's house, and then a minimum portion of the distribution system, because that system exists so that we can deliver water cleanly and safely to our customers. And so when we look at those fixed components, the 5/8" meter, which is the majority of your residential class, is showing that the cost to serve is $20.87. We're currently charging $19.50. So that's really good. I will say that. From what we see nationally, you're super close to cost to serve. And that's because you traditionally always kept up with these monthly facilities charges. And as you go through the table, the cost of service based charges go up with the increase in meter size. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at the variable component. So the cost of service variable component averages out to 5.96 cents per CCF. And the current commodity charge is 5.13 cents. Now, this is important to understand as well because you charge a blocked rate and it's declining. So what this table is showing is that average revenue recovery when you look at both block rates combined. And this charge, it still needs to go up, but we need to talk a little bit more about the declining block. And this gets at the crux of our rate design and our cost of service. So if we go to the next slide, our block is set at 10,000 CF. For a benchmark, your average residential usage is 536 CF. So a resident is nowhere close to this block level. When I ran all of your customer impacts, we only found 2 residential users in 2024 that were hitting this block. The first one was a leak that has since been fixed. Yes, good. And the second is an apartment complex. So they're a little bit of a different type of user as they're serving multiple residents. And once you hit that 10,000 CF, so these are your businesses, your industries, your sales for resale, the rate per unit is billed at a lower rate. And there's actually no cost to serve basis for doing this. The long-term goal, you'll see with this rate design, is to move to one single rate, so where everybody's getting charged the same, and then eventually in the future move to an inclining block rate, and that's more indicative of that long-term marginal cost of having to serve greater capacity in the future. Any questions on these concepts here before we move into some of the rate impacts? Okay. Okay, so the way that we looked at revising the usage rate is by separating the usage rate by class. So retail residential would be those 5/8 inch, 1 inch. I think you have a couple 1.5 inch meters that would fall under this designation. And those are residential customers that you serve directly. With them, because we have so few that even touch that 10,000 block, it was really easy to take and move them to a single rate. So currently we're getting this yellow arrow here, the 5.3 cents. We would be moving them to 5.45 cents in January, and it goes up from there to work toward that cost of serve value. But we wouldn't give them the block. So they would all be served with just a single usage rate. Now for non-residential, so commercial, industrial, sales for resale, we would keep the block for now, but we're going to slowly start to merge that block to the single rate. So they're looking down in the green arrow here, these last two lines. We're keeping that second lower block, but we're moving it up at a higher pace than what we're moving up the first block. So that eventually out in 2028, all three rates are the same. And this will simplify billing and be more in line with cost of service. But what this allowed us to do on the rate design is to put more of that 10% increase into the outer block and limit the impact to the first block. We can go to the next slide. So looking at a full sample rate design, what's really cool about this is that we're actually able to move our monthly customer charges, oh, that's okay, to cost of service out in this last year. And of course, cost of service, we're looking at 2026 revenue requirements. So if we were to run the cost of service study again out in 2028, those charges would be something higher, just because of inflation and so forth. But working toward cost of service is what we want to do, and one of the main goals of this study. So out in 2028, for all meter charges except for the 6 inch and the 8 inch, I wasn't able to quite get those up to cost of serve, but everybody else would be meeting or slightly exceeding that cost of service value for the monthly fixed cost recovery. The next section of rates are for your hydrants and your fire sprinklers, and I just kept them in line with the system average for increasing each year. And then we've reviewed the usage charges. This little section is the same as what we looked at on the previous slide. And you can see in the last two lines, it's really tiny. Hopefully you have it in front of you. But the revenue recovery from our rates achieves that 6% adjustment in January, and then the series of 10% adjustments that we showed in the financial summary. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And then we wanted to show the full impact on the average residential user. So most of your residential users are a 5/8 inch meter. This top portion is a summary of the rates for a 5/8 inch meter in each of the years. And the bottom tables show the impact by usage level. So the way to read this table is the usage levels on the side. I've highlighted 500 and 600 because the average user is 536 CF. So they're going to fall somewhere in there. And you can see each year, because January we're doing 6%, they're going to have about a $1.25 monthly impact. And then the years when we're doing a 10% adjustment overall, that translates to a $2.57 monthly bill impact, going up to about $3 a month. On a percentage basis, they're looking at about 5.5% impact on their bill. And with that, I think that's all of the all of the slides.